Give your whole thing.
Wow. This is a hearing of the Congressional Executive Commission on China. The title of the hearing is, Will the Hong Kong Model Survive? An assessment 20 years after the handover. We're going to have two panels testifying today. The first panel will feature the Right Honourable Lord Patten of Barnes, Christopher Patten, testifying via video link from London. Lord Patten, in addition to serving in the House of Lords, was the last British governor of Hong Kong and oversaw the transfer to China 20 years ago this July. The second panel will include Joshua Wong from the Umbrella Movement. It's his leader, the Secretary General of the new Hong Kong political party, Demasisto. Demasisto? Did I pronounce that? Great. Martin Lee, barrister, founding chairman of the Democratic Party of Hong Kong, former member of the drafting committee for the Basic Law, and former member of the Legislative Council of Hong Kong from 1985 through 2008. Lang Wing-Gay, founder, Causeway Bay Books, one of the 5 forcibly disappeared Hong Kong booksellers, and Ellen Bork, a writer whose work on democracy and human rights as a priority in American foreign policy has appeared in the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, and the Financial Times, among other publications. I would also note that translating for Mr. Lam is Ms. Mook Ying Ting, a journalist and veteran of the Hong Kong Journalists Association, the territory's leading defender of press freedom. As has already been noted, today's hearing is timely given the 20th anniversary, this July, of the British handover of Hong Kong. As we rewatch film footage and commentary of that historic day, we can't help but take note of the pageantry, the raising and lowering of flags, the solemn handshakes, the national anthems. Many observers describe the handover as signifying the sunset of a once great colonial power and the ascent of a rising China. But there was and remains far more at stake. On that day in 1997, Lord Patten, who we'll hear from momentarily, spoke of Hong Kong's unshakable destiny, a Hong Kong governed by and for the people of Hong Kong, and it is that destiny that animates today's gathering. However, in recent years, Beijing has consistently undermined the one country, two systems principle and has infringed on the democratic freedoms that the residents of Hong Kong are supposed to be guaranteed under the Sino-British Joint Declaration and an international treaty, which is an international treaty, and Hong Kong's basic law. The rise of localist politicians and activists who call for greater political and legal self-determination for Hong Kong has drawn harsh reprisals from the Chinese and the Hong Kong governments. The Chinese government's November 2016 interpretation of Hong Kong's basic law effectively prohibited 2 recently elected Hong Kong legislators from taking office and was viewed as a blow to Hong Kong's judicial independence. The Hong Kong government is currently seeking the removal from office of 4 other pro-democratic legislators, all along the same lines. In March of this year, 9 activists were arrested for their participation in the Occupy Central protests in 2014, including 2 sitting pro-democratic lawmakers. Their arrests came less than 24 hours after the undemocratic, quote-unquote, election of Carrie Lam to serve as Hong Kong's next chief executive, which drew widespread condemnation and accusations of a retaliatory campaign aimed at punishing leaders of the Hong Kong democracy movement and suppressing dissent prior to her taking office. In late 2015, 5 Hong Kong-based booksellers, including one of today's witnesses, were disappeared or abducted to mainland China. One of these booksellers, Wei Ming-hai, a Swedish citizen abducted from Thailand, remains in custody in China, where he will mark his 53rd birthday this coming Friday. The disappearances and abductions of the booksellers and their coerced, quote-unquote, confessions, which were broadcast on Hong Kong television, that sent shockwaves through the city and are reflective of a larger troubling trend in the area of press freedom and freedom of expression. Today happens to be World Press Freedom Day, and it bears mentioning that the recently released Reporters Without Borders Index ranking, which ranks countries for their press freedom environment, had Hong Kong slipping 4 places in a single year. In February, Senators Cardin and Cotton joined me in introducing the bipartisan Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act, which would renew the United States' historical commitment to Hong Kong at a time when its autonomy is increasingly under assault. The legislation also establishes punitive measures against government officials in Hong Kong or mainland China who are responsible for suppressing basic freedoms. Looking ahead, Congress will be closely watching how Hong Kong authorities and the mainland handle the 20th anniversary, as well as whether Ms. Lam moves to reintroduce Article 23, widely despised anti-subversion and anti-sedition legislation first proposed in 2002, which triggered massive protests in which 500,000 Hong Kongers took to the streets. And for all these reasons is why we look forward to today's hearing, because without question there are many layers and complexities to our relationship with China, as evidenced by the questions during yesterday's hearing for Governor Branstad to serve as U.S. Ambassador to China. Despite the multitude of challenges, Hong Kong's future, indeed its destiny, must not be sidelined. China's assault on democratic institutions and human rights is of central importance to the people of Hong Kong and to its status as a free market, economic powerhouse, and hub for international trade and investment. We cannot allow Hong Kong to go the way of Beijing's failed authoritarianism and one-party rule. At this time, I would turn to Congressman Smith, and I would note that the Congressman has another important bill up for markup. At some point, he'll have to leave early, but we, as always, are appreciative of his incredible leadership on this committee and on this cause. We thank you for your testimony, and I know you're pressed on time, and we have a substantial time difference. So I'll be brief unless any of the other members of the commission appear during your time on our video screen. And I think you've touched on this already, but how would you assess the British and Chinese governments with regard to fulfilling their respective obligations under the joint declaration? Is this, as you look 20 years into the future, is this what you thought it would look like? Is this what you had envisioned from both sides 20 years ago? Or if someone had told you this is the way it was going to look like 20 years later, how would you have felt 20 years ago?
I would have been pleased that the worst that some people anticipated didn't happen. There were many, Milton Friedman was one who thought that one country, two systems was impossible. There were others who thought that, for example, even I would be leaving in a helicopter from the ballroom roof in Government House, and that sooner or later there would be violence in Hong Kong, and that hasn't happened, though there's occasionally been some pretty rough policing. When I was in Hong Kong, we would occasionally have a few hundred people demonstrating. It's been rather different from that. But there has been, I think, a steady and growing erosion, as Anson Chan and as Martin Lee and others have said, of Hong Kong's autonomy. And I think that's much to be regretted. And Hong Kong and China will be the losers from that. I don't want to exaggerate, and I've never set myself up as a day-to-day commentator on everything that goes wrong in Hong Kong. The Taiwanese, of course, not least because one country, two systems was designed for them as well, keep a very beady eye on things and have suggested that there have been 169 breaches of the joint declaration. Well, I wouldn't say that myself. What I would say is that the British government have not always been, and let me choose my words very carefully, have not always been very robust in drawing attention to breaches, whether large or small, of the undertakings, both the letter and the spirit, made by China, and I rather regret that. The House of Commons Select Committee on Foreign Affairs did produce itself quite a robust report in 2015, having been banned from going to Hong Kong by the Chinese authorities. I just hope that we will speak out, the British government will speak out rather more loudly over the coming months and years. I've always felt that we, and I blame myself a bit, but I blame British governments over a long period of time. I always felt that we let down the generation before Joshua Wong, his parents' generation, and I hope that we don't let down Joshua Wong's generation as well, because the most exciting and important thing, I think, to have happened is there remains in Hong Kong a sense of citizenship in a free society, which is exemplified by the brave way in which Joshua and his colleagues have behaved.
Lord Patton, I have two observations before we thank you for your time. The first is, if your cousins over here across the Atlantic 241 years ago had not been so rebellious in their revolution, both Senator Daines and I would be members of the U.S. House of Peers, and he would be Lord Daines and I would be Lord Rubio. And this is a joke, and I'm not suggesting it.
And I might have fetched up as Governor of Ohio.
Yes, sir. Well, it's like that title, Supreme Allied Commander. It's just such a good title, you know. But we'll. Senator's great. But and the second is, as we look at Hong Kong, the one thing that strikes me is it really, in many ways, is an example of what China can and should be. Greater China. There's this notion out there that somehow democracy is incompatible with a culture, which is absolutely false. And the second is, just think of this as one of the greatest civilizations in the history of mankind, which has made extraordinary contributions across millennia. Imagine that creativity, that thousands of years of culture and tradition and science and all these contributions that the Chinese people have made to the world was unleashed in an environment where there was political freedom, academic freedom, economic freedom. It would be an extraordinary contribution to the world. Hong Kong, this small little sliver of land with a limited population, has done so many, it punches above its weight economically. Imagine if that were true for over 1 billion people in the mainland and what that could mean. And so for us, as much as anything else, Hong Kong is and remains, and that's why it's so important to us, an example of the extraordinary contributions that I believe the people of China have an opportunity to make in the 21st century to add to the extraordinary tradition of what they've contributed to the world for thousands of years. I'm personally a huge admirer of the Chinese culture, of Chinese history, of Chinese civilization, and of the contributions they've made to all of mankind. And I'm excited about what they're going to be able to do if only over 1 billion of their people had the both political and economic freedom to truly fulfill their potential. And I think Hong Kong is a model of what that could look like if only these conditions were not to be eroded moving forward. So we're going to move on, and we're going to make a special kind of accommodation here if the witnesses are okay. You know, Joshua Wong needs to be on an airplane to Toronto, so we're going to, assuming we're still going to get through the hearing, but what I'd like to do is recognize him for his testimony. I would encourage it to be brief so we can get to questions and then we can get you to the airport, because I can get you through this hearing. I can't help you through TSA. No one can, to be frank. So, but Joshua, we're grateful that you're here today, and we look forward to your testimony. And I know I have a number of questions. Some of my colleagues could not be here today. They do have some questions in writing, I believe, and we'll get those to you, and you'll answer them when you have some time. You're one of the busiest young people I've ever met in my life, and you must have a lot of frequent flyer miles on your airlines as well. But thank you, Joshua, for being here. Yeah. We're honored you're here. Thank you, Joshua. Thank you. We're grateful that you're here and have tremendous admiration for your advocacy. And I've often spoken about you to university students that I teach at Florida International University and in other places as an example of political engagement under quite difficult circumstances. We take, sometimes I should say, our freedoms for granted here in the United States because we have extraordinary freedoms. But we're reminded through you and others that there are incredible people around the world that are confronting this, as some of the panelists have as well. So, and again, I know you need to get to Canada, so I wanted to ask you a couple questions. First, can you tell us how the Hong Kong government's legal actions against democracy advocates and members of the opposition have influenced your thinking on the future of Hong Kong's democracy movement?
Last year, September, was the Legislative Council election. 4 new elected legislators upholding civil disobedience enter the Legislative Council from the civil society. And later that, the government just issued a court case to 4 of them, and including 2 others advocate Hong Kong independence. Even I'm not the one advocate Hong Kong independence, but disqualifying the democratically elected legislator just proved that the China government and Hong Kong government would try to override the judicial independence and rule of law in Hong Kong, and it's totally not respect to the current election system. And at the same time, political prosecution happened and also proved the hardline of President Xi is just following by the new elected chief executive, Carrie Lam. After 26th of March, the election day of the chief executive, the day after Hong Kong government just arrest and prosecuted the 9 umbrella movement leaders. And it's just proof that in the future, it's not an easy time for us to fight for democracy. At the same time, 3rd of July would be another court case and a trial for me to face, and it's the sentence of contempt of court. And in the worst case, I may be sent into the prison for few months or even few years. But I would say that now, in fact, fight for democracy is a long-term battle. In the last battle 3 years ago in the umbrella movement, even we can't achieve a concrete political system reform, but at least we raise the new generation political awareness and keep the community, international community eyes in Hong Kong. That's why in this long-term battle, the new generation is ready for this fight until the day we get back democracy.
Well, explain to me, in your view, what does self-determination for Hong Kong mean?
Self-determination to Hong Kong means that the political system, political status, and the future constitutional arrangement of Hong Kong should be decided by Hong Kong people. According to the Sino-British Joint Declaration, it proved that Hong Kong can implement one country, two system from 1997 to 2047 under the 50 years unchanged policy framework. After 2047, I will be 51 years old. At that moment, I'm not sure whether Hong Kong will turn to be one country, one and a half system, or result in the worst case, one country, one system. And what we hope is to let people to realize that it's time for Hong Kong people to rule Hong Kong, and it's time for Hong Kong people to determine their own future.
Finally, what recommendations, and you touched on it a little bit when you talked about the hope that we could come together in a bipartisan way, but on some of these issues. Do you have any recommendations on things we can do, whether it's this commission, the Congress, the President Trump's administration, on what we can do here from the United States government side to promote continued protections in Hong Kong for democracy and human rights and the rule of law? What's the best thing we can be doing?
I hope Hong Kong issue can get a higher priority in the political agenda of U.S. towards China policy. We know that South China Sea, Taiwan issue or others are always the main issue or the incident that we need to tackle or face. But the fact is, I believe supporting democracy in Hong Kong is just rely totally on the international treaty, Sino-British Joint Declaration. So what I hope is in the future, supporting democracy in Hong Kong should be a bipartisan consensus, and I believe it's also an achievable goal for the international civil society. In the future, apart from having op-ed, press release statement before the 1st of July to let people realize that while Xi Jinping hope to prove everything is under his control, we will still organize a large-scale demonstration in Hong Kong to let him and the China government know that we are still continue our fight to democracy. And at the same time, we just hoped people around the world, especially in the international community, no matter senator or congressman, apart from op-ed, press release, we hope it will have the possibility to figure out the chance of organizing a delegation to Hong Kong and also pushing forward the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act to let, in the global level, the international community can realize that supporting Hong Kong democracy is the only gateway or the window for us to push forward China communist regime to respect on human rights, democracy, and rule of law. That's why, according to the U.S. business interests and caring about the stability and prosperity of Hong Kong, according to what I've mentioned about the citizen and U.S. company based in Hong Kong, I hope in the future, the new administration can also take Hong Kong as a higher priority agenda.
Well, and I just want you to know that both in our private meeting and yesterday at our hearing, we've discussed with the President's nominee to be ambassador to Beijing, Governor Branstad of Iowa, the importance of Hong Kong and of your cause. And my hope is that we can facilitate an opportunity for you and members of your political party to meet with him, if not here before he leaves, certainly once confirmed by the Senate. My final question for you, Mr. Wong, is I know that last week several legislative council members that had been targeted for removal, but several of the party members were arrested last week. Can you update us on their status?
The disqualification of legislative court case will issue on May. So which means that a few weeks later, maybe 2 or 3 weeks later, we will know the results, including the umbrella movement student leader Nathan Law, the youngest lawmaker in my hometown, whether they can still keep their seat in the Legislative Council. In the worst case, due to the current legal system in Hong Kong, if those legislators lose in the court case, they need to pay the legal fee of the government side with 3 million. So it will have the chance of face bankruptcy for Nathan Law and other legislators. That's why it's a time for us to face the prosecution and also the disqualification of legislators.
Were several members of your political party arrested last week?
Yeah, at the same time...
Where are they now?
On Friday, 2 days later, the political movement activists, including 2 party members from my political party Demosisto, Ivan Lam and Derek Lam, they will face the trial in the court due to the participation of the assembly last November against the reinterpretation of basic law from the National People Congress.
But of the ones that were, how many were arrested last week?
9.
9.
Yeah.
Of the 9 that were arrested, do any remain in custody?
They are still get a chance to get a bail, and now they will wait. They're waiting to go to the court on Friday and to face the trial.
But they're still in jail right now?
Not yet, no.
They're out?
They're not in jail.
Oh, they're not? They were released on...
Yeah, they're released and get a court bail.
And now they're awaiting trial?
Yeah, waiting for the trial.
Well, we appreciate very much, Mr. Wong, that you're being here today. I'm sure we've seen you quite a bit in the last few months. I encourage you to continue to do what you're doing. Know that this commission, my office, the members on remain at your disposal to continue to highlight your cause and the greater cause of democracy and rule of law in Hong Kong. And I wish you continued success, both on your trip now and as you work your way through. Which airport are you going through, Reagan or Dulles?
I'm not sure. I need to check my etiquette.
Whichever one.
Yeah, sorry for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe we shouldn't announce which one you're going
Okay.
to.
Anyway.
But
yeah, thank you
he's
for...
leaving from Baltimore, and
Yeah.
so anyway, Mr. Wong, thank you very much for coming, and we look forward to continuing to talk to you more and more about this in the weeks and months to come.
Yeah, I appreciate and thank you for CECC in the previous few years, especially since the umbrella movement continued to put effort to support universal suffrage, democracy, and the democratic camps in Hong Kong.
Well, we're just getting started. We're going to continue to press on the case. So we thank you so much.
Yes, it's the long-term battle. Thank you.
Well, let me assure you, there's at least a dozen or so countries around the world that have told me to mind my own business just in the last month, and I don't. And I would also say that the human rights of our fellow brothers and sisters around the world is our business. It should be all of our business. And Ms. Bork, I've read extensively the things you've written over the years on a number of issues, including this. I would just ask, and I think you touched on it briefly, but do you have any specific policy recommendations for the Commission or the Congress with regards to the Hong Kong Policy Act, given the ongoing challenges to the autonomy and so forth? I mean, we're always looking for what can we do beyond holding these hearings, and I think it's very powerful, the forum of the U.S. Senate. Beyond that, what do you, and if you don't, perhaps for the record later, some specific suggestions?
Certainly, but I do think the Hong Kong, the Democracy and Rule of Law Act, or Human Rights Act, sorry, that you're working on is major in that it would completely change the outlook towards Hong Kong policy, which has been to let things move along, let China see the value of Hong Kong staying the way it is, when, frankly, I don't think a Communist Party really can quite do that. It's certainly not without being encouraged to do so by the world's most powerful democracy. So I wouldn't in any way underestimate the importance of that addition of sanctions for misbehavior in Hong Kong. I think that's huge. And I'll certainly be happy to think of some others. I think focusing on changes in Hong Kong's law enforcement culture is really important. What's going on that they can act this way? Are they eroding? Can you begin to focus more on the autonomy of specific institutions, the courts, the police, law enforcement, other institutions? I think that's really vital as well. And I would just say, and it's a very broad question, but I think to the point, you just heard Mr. Lee discuss where we were going to be told, mind your own business. Why is this our business? Why should
at the most basic level, why should the people who sent me here from the state of Florida support my involvement on this issue? Why does it matter to them? Why does it matter to the country?
The United States has both an interest and an obligation to pursue, these are universal values. I mean, I think people often define them as though it's America foisting its own values. In fact, I think America, as the most powerful democracy, has the ability and the obligation to defend universal rights and freedoms for people who cannot. There's no doubt in my mind that it benefits the United States to function in a world with more democracies, more respect for freedoms, more respect for rule of law. And I have to, in all of my experience visiting and talking to dissidents, they welcome it. Democracy activists around the world always welcome it. They don't see it as an intrusion. So let's think about who's saying this is interference and who's not. I really think the world's Democrats struggling for their own rights and freedoms do not see it as interference at all.
And Mr. Lamb, I ask you, given everything that you have confronted, we hold this hearing today. It's a commission. A number of my colleagues were able to come. Others I know follow carefully, but because of scheduling conflicts could not. And oftentimes there's a feeling that what we do here is we hold these meetings and it's busy work, but it doesn't really make a difference because it's not a law or a program we're putting money behind. From your perspective, as someone who has been persecuted, as someone who has been harassed, as someone who has been jailed because of your advocacy for these universal principles that we all believe in or should all believe in, when we speak about these issues, when we highlight cases like yours, when we have someone like Mr. Wong here, when we talk about these issues, can you tell us what that means to someone half a world away who is confronting these challenges and is often told by the tyrants that, no, you don't matter, no one cares about you, you're on your own, and you're on a losing side? What does it mean that we do this? Is what we do here meaningful to people in your situation?
我舉個例子係當時我出嚟公開呢件事係因為受到6000幾個香港人上嚟聲援，我先至會出嚟公開整件事情。
I was encouraged by more than 6,000 people go to the street to support me. So when I heard the news, I decided to come out and speak out my case.
證明係我哋見到不公不義嘅人係可以走出嚟揚聲，係表明個態度係反對嘅話，係影響到其他人係有效嘅。呢個亦都係憑平時嗰個累積個效果會更加明顯。
So my coming out demonstrate that all those, if we voice out the injustice against the injustice, show that we oppose it, it will have effect. And the accumulative effect will be more explicit.
即係話，如果每一個香港人都係可以面對大陸嘅打壓係企出嚟嘅話，香港就有希望。
If everyone who face the suppression of China will stand up, and this will have effect to fight against such suppression. So, so such kind of hearing will be definitely beneficial to the situation like me.
Well, and I agree, and I thank you for being here, and all of you for being here. And I would close by telling you 2 examples of why this work can be rewarding. One of the cases we've discussed often in the commission, in hearings, in meetings, has been the case of an American citizen, Sandy Fang Gillis, who was unjustly jailed in China under ridiculous accusations. And we continue to raise her case, that and of her family, and that led to a positive outcome. One case among thousands that we're facing. The other is the case in a different part of the world of Aya Hijazi, who was a an employee at a non-governmental organization working on a number of very important issues on the ground in Egypt. She was jailed under ridiculous charges. And I can tell you, when President al-Sisi of Egypt visited, there wasn't a meeting he had on the Hill where her case was not brought. And that was true at his meetings in the White House, to the point where by the end of his visit, he was a little annoyed. But Aya Hijazi is now in the United States along with her husband. And one of the stories that they shared with us, that while still imprisoned, somehow someone was able to allow them to view videos of a speech that I was able to give on the Senate floor and others about their cause. And it certainly emboldened them, and it made them understand that they mattered. The thing that tyrants and dictators and oppressors tell people all over the world is no one cares about you anymore. They've forgotten about you. They don't even talk about you. We're having meetings with presidents. We're cutting deals. We're doing all kinds of things. No one speaks about you. And I imagine it's designed to demoralize. As long as the people of Florida allow me to serve on here, there'll be at least one senator that will continue to talk about you and everyone like you in Hong Kong, in China, and all over the world. And frankly, I think there are more than just one. There are numerous of my colleagues. And our hope is to continue to highlight human rights as a key pillar of our national security and our foreign policy, because here's what I know. The more a country oppresses its own people, the likelier they are to create chaos and havoc and uncertainty everywhere else in the world. Meanwhile, for the most part, free people who choose their own leaders and have economic freedom don't have time for wars. They're interested in running a business, and if their leaders get too far, they vote them out of office because they want peace and prosperity. Everybody has a different idea of what democracy and freedom may look like, maybe a parliamentary system, some have a House of Lords, some have a Senate. But the bottom line is that the more role people have in choosing their leaders and the direction of their nations, the less likely those nations are to wage war against their neighbors and destabilize the world. And to retreat from that in this new century would not just be catastrophic, it would be tragic, and history will not be forgiving. And so your cause is a critical component of this broader strategy, and we will continue to raise it everywhere we can. And we are just grateful that we were able to have individuals like yourselves, and in particular you, Mr. Lamb, given the risks you run being here today. And I reiterate what I said at the outset, and I think I speak for every member of the Commission, and hopefully for every member of the Senate, on which I serve, that we will keep tabs and watch very closely how you are treated upon your return. We're glad you're returning. Hong Kong needs you. And we'll watch very closely. And if, in fact, retribution is taken against you, we will attribute that to your presence here today, and it will impact everything that I do, and hopefully everything that the Senate does when it comes to our interaction with the Chinese Communist Party and their government. So I thank you all for being here. I appreciate your indulgence. I apologize for the interruption, but we are grateful to you, to all of you, for your time. With that, the meeting of this commission is adjourned.